Hello, and welcome to Mystic Dog Mama, the podcast for soul led dog mamas, where you'll discover how to best nourish your dog and yourself, mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Dr. Alexia Meller. Hi there, and thank you for joining me for today's conversation. Now, what if letting your dog follow their nose was more than just enrichment, but actually a path to healing the earth and ourselves? In this heart expanding episode, I'm joined by Laura Holder, owner of Conservation Dogs Collective, whose work with scent detection dogs is not only protecting endangered species and ecosystems, but also inviting us to reconnect with nature in powerful ways. We explore the incredible ways that dogs are being trained to track native wildlife, to detect invasive species, and to support conservation efforts across the country. But we also dive deeper into what it means to let our dogs truly be dogs, how sniffing is their way of engaging with the world, and how tuning into their natural instincts can help us to remember our own. This conversation is a call to slow down, to honor the wisdom of the natural world, and to step more fully into our role as stewards of the planet, paw in hand. Now, before we get started, I wanted to let you know that this episode is sponsored by Fetch. This particular conversation builds upon the Fetch First Friday episode that Stacy Renfrey of Hozo Hounds and I did on how to take a different approach to parasite prevention in order to not only protect our dogs, but the environment too. If you're curious about how to evaluate your dog's parasite risk and prevent parasites naturally without harsh chemicals, you're going to love our Fetch Parasites and Our Dogs, a Paradigm Shift ebook. Grab your copy at mysticdogmama.com/shop and feel empowered to protect your pup naturally. I've left this link in the show notes. Okay, on that note, let's go. Hi, Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on the Mystic Dog Mama podcast today. I'm thrilled that you're here with me.
All right. Thank you for having me on this morning, Alexia. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, I'm really excited because I wanted to let the listeners know that I first came across your work actually from a fellow canine nutritionist in the industry that had mentioned your organization, Conservation Dogs, and I was like, "Ooh, what is this? I need to know more about this." And immediately was like, "Oh my God, this is such important and interesting work that you're doing." And I wanted to bring it to the audience because not only are we sort of invested dog parents, but we are really interested in those more important ways in which we are engaging with dogs and working with dogs and collaborating with dogs and all of the lovely stories that come out of that. So I'm really excited to share the work that you're doing today because it's so important in the current climate.
Absolutely. I'm very excited to talk about all of that. There's a lot of experience I have to share, like from a working perspective, but also working alongside other people and their dogs too. So yeah,
Absolutely. Well, do you mind just starting out by sharing a little bit about what it is that you do and how you got into it?
for sure. So I am the owner of Conservation Dogs Collective, and with that role, I share my life, my home, and my working hours alongside Finders Ernie and Finder Betty White. Those are my two dogs. They're both Labrador Retrievers. And I train them to sniff out different types of target species for conservation focused projects. So currently we are doing bumblebee nest detection, and then we're also doing a few species of turtle work as well. And then I've got some experience beyond that doing invasive plant work, some aquatic invasive species work, and so forth. So beyond, working and playing with my dogs, I also do the business side of things too. So while I thoroughly enjoy being out and working with the four-leggeds, I also do take a lot of pride in operating a business and sharing a lot of our work on an educational platform as well, like we're doing today.
Oh,
So
amazing.
yeah, and I got my start with dogs back in 2011 when I had a family companion at that point who needed something to do. He was a little bit overreactive to other dogs and people, and I found the sport of canine nose work at that point, and that's where you train dogs to sniff out essential oils, and if you want to go on to do competitions and so forth, you can do that. And I saw over the course of training with him and having my own coach train us together how his behavior changed like immensely just by allowing him to like sniff, like allowing him basically to be a dog and express himself in a very natural fashion. So from there, I got hooked on nose work, and I've since 2011 been teaching canine nose work classes and private lessons, and then I shifted into conservation in 2017 when I got a call from a local nature preserve who wanted to train an on-staff dog handler team. So I, from the ground up, helped them get their program going, and then I, since that time, got Ernie and Betty White and started doing the work myself on an annual basis.
Oh, that's incredible. And a lot of listeners are actually kind of facing similar challenges to what you just described with your first dog of behavior challenges and not necessarily knowing how to give appropriate outlets for the dog to be a dog. I mean, that's something that I'm a massive advocate for is that we need it's less about trying to get the dog to fit into our world and more about understanding how the dog is and then providing appropriate outlets for those natural behaviors that we have bred them to be able to do, which, that's on us too, right? Like we've created these creatures to do these things, and so how do we best support them with that? But also a lot of people are interested in getting into things like nose work because it's so enriching for the dog and it's so interesting. But I love that you've taken it to that next level as well, whereby it's serving such a valuable role in the wider ecosystem and in the community. So could you talk a little bit about, I guess, that transition for you of going into the conservation work and how does it differ the way that you train a dog to do that versus training a dog to do something like nose work to help with reactivity, for example? Or are they the same?
Yeah, so there is definitely some overlap in the the foundation skills and training, for like how to handle your training samples and like setting out your training samples for your dog to hopefully, like meet them where they're at in their learning.
Mm.
Um, what is honestly like the most challenging part, I think, of the scent work and the nose work learning is the humans, like allowing us to really be very naive learners in a way, because the dogs are teaching us how to see their world through how they explore it through their nose, right? So like that is a direct overlap, regardless if you're doing it for fun, for competition, or for a career. And that to me, like I learn every single time I'm working alongside my dogs or coaching other teams, and I've been at it for 14 years now. But like with that first dog that I had, his name was Oscar. I didn't feel like I understood what he was really showing us through the world of scent until like I was doing it for about a year or a year and a half even, right? Like really understanding like, oh, why would odor be collecting over here versus in like the actual hides, 20 feet away. So some of that um that early learning I had through my first dog definitely helped me expedite my professional career when I started doing this for more conservation focused efforts, right? And there are certainly some things with conservation detection that are much different. When we deal with invasive species or endangered species, the amount of permitting that's required, for me to handle, store, or even not even touch some of the species that we're working with. That's very different than having essential oils in your house, right? Or teaching your dog to locate your car keys or something. So having the opportunity to even share that with like you today and your listeners, and then also like I get inquiries all the time from folks that are like, oh my God, my dog loves to smell. There's finding things all the time when we're walking down the street or when we're out on hikes, and I want to do this work. And I'm like, that's awesome. Let's talk more. But sharing the approximations towards like, do you really want to take this into a professional sense? Knowing some of the challenges that go along with working in conservation. And there are certainly different projects that people can be working on where they don't have to worry about all those permitting and partnership requirements and different types of regulations state by state or even country to country are very different.
Mm. Yeah, no, I can understand that. I'm curious, as you mentioned that Oscar was teaching you about a different way of like seeing the world. What were some of the things that kind of came out of that for you that were most surprising?
Yeah, so I think, well, when I was a little child, I never had a dog, and I always like pretended to be a dog in a way, and like I would like sit and look out my window and do funny things that other children probably weren't doing. Um, and what Oscar really taught me was to be observant and unbiased. So, like, he was very aware of his environment around him. He was a German Shepherd. That's what they're bred for, so a big part
Hmm.
of his genetic needs. And, like, for me to also just take a moment sometimes and not have the end goal of finding the thing that was hidden in the environment for him to find, but appreciate the process with which he was interpreting how scent was moving, but also how the environment around him was moving, if you know what I mean, like the
Yeah.
stimuli around him. And all of that, I think, has been some of the I'll say like indirect outcomes that I never thought I'd be learning about, when working alongside dogs. Because like I understand learning theory and all the, like behavior modification stuff, but like the world of nose work and how dogs really interpret the world through the sense of smell has been just incredible. And I'm sure some of your listeners and yourself have seen that. Like, what is my dog sniffing? You go on a walk, you're
Yeah.
like, what are they even sniffing? I can't see anything. What are they sniffing here? Versus it being like a pile of poop or something. You're like, oh, obviously they're smelling poop, but they can smell so many things. And I think the curiosity that comes out of just allowing your dog to have those moments and just somewhat be in awe of like the things they can do with their nose and how their nose is interpreting the world around them is a good reminder to us to maybe slow down a little bit, and
Hmm.
be more aware of our community, our environmental community around us.
Oh, I love that. No, I agree. And I was just, I recorded an episode a little bit earlier about this journey that I've just taken with Lucky from Mexico to the UK. And this is the first time that he's been out of Mexico. So this is a complete, not only the actual trip of doing that, but then realizing I had these like beautiful moments and I kind of equate it to like if I had human children, it would be like his first steps sort of thing, like those like kind of key moments where I was like, oh my God, this is the first time he's experiencing grass and mud and deciduous trees. And he walked up to a daffodil, and the daffodil was taller than him. And he was like, what is this thing? Like all of these things that like I would take for granted because I'm familiar with all of this,
Yeah.
that for him it's like being on a different planet.
Hmm.
Totally different. And it was such an invitation for me to, like you were saying, instead of trying to get from like point A to point B with the walk, making it about a destination or something that I thought we should be experiencing, just watching what he did, just observing and like how did he choose to navigate through that space? And also how I've noticed a difference with how he then navigates with different dogs in those spaces too.
Hmm.
The different relationships that he's kind of forming with it. It's fascinating that if you can give yourself that kind of patience, like and grace to not have to make the walk about completing something like an objective based
Hmm.
experience, but actually just witnessing it. There's so much beauty in that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. I love it. Like my
Yeah.
favorite part of my day is walking alongside my dogs. I'm not taking the dogs for a walk. They're sometimes taking me for a walk, down the street physically, but like walking alongside and being really present because like our dogs just don't live long enough. That's a fact. They're not with us that long, and I think taking the time to really um be creative too in their world. Like I've gotten interested enough in things that they are investigating in the environment where like I will actually take after they kind of leave that area, I'll be like, what is that they were so interested in, and like if it's appropriate to touch, touching it and not necessarily smelling it unless if it's something that I think I know what the smell is going to be like. But really having that collaborative relationship with them, is it's one of the best gifts you can give yourself living alongside another species.
Hmm. Yeah, I interviewed David Ian Howe, who is an archaeologist and anthropologist that specializes in ethnocynology, so the way in which dogs and humans have co-evolved from, 40,000 years ago, right? Like, and I love how he frames all of this, that we cannot understand what it means to be human without understanding dogs and vice versa, because we have both directly, quite literally, impacted one another's evolution, which is just incredible. And we don't have that kind of relationship with any other species, particularly for that length of time and that kind of depth of engaging with one another. And I see the work that you're doing as like the next step in our current development with dogs, but from that history of having worked together with them, collaborated with them for, millennia, which is incredible.
Right. I know. I have to read or I have to listen to that episode because like I find that fascinating. Like the coevolution of two species. And like you said, it's
Hmm.
like humans and canines together are the only
Hmm.
ones. I just saw your dog in the
Yeah.
background.
Yeah.
Oh,
He's freaked out because there's a fly in here.
oh. So cute.
A fly got trapped and he's like, the world is coming to an end.
Oh, jeez. Very important in my world right now to
Exactly.
take care of this.
Exactly. Exactly. But no, I love that. And I think, we were talking just before we started recording about some of the conflicted discussions that are happening around the relationship between dogs and the environment and sort of the ramifications of what it means to be with dogs in this day and age of climate change and the sixth mass extinction and all of this kind of context. And I think something that's really important, as we were saying, is to kind of bridge those conversations and to kind of nuance the way that we're thinking about our relationship with dogs and how that's actually, I think, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, it's really asking us those deeper questions of what it means to be human and how we see ourselves in our current role, whether we see that as stewards or we see ourselves as working alongside different species. Because I love that you say that specifically, that it's not about this in a sense like you working or the dog's working for you, but it is a collaborative endeavor that ultimately allows you to explore the environment and learn about the environment in new ways that you can't possibly do as just your human self.
Mhm.
Because
Absolutely.
there's this other dimension of experience and understanding that's coming through it. And I wonder in your work in conservation and kind of I'm imagining kind of butting up against some of these bigger discussions and challenges and concerns. How do you navigate some of that? And what do you see as a potential for dogs helping us work through this as our own species, I guess?
Yeah, there's so many answers or like thoughts I have around that question and this discussion. I mean, first and foremost, like whenever I'm talking with a prospective client or partner, or even the general public at a presentation or a demonstration, I really try to convey like the dogs are not machines. Like they are sentient beings. When I'm talking to partners in particular, um, oftentimes we're getting asked to do some pretty some pretty tall tasks, right? Like, oh, you're our last resort. Like, we think the dog can find, basically a needle in the haystack. We've tried all these other methods. I'm like, listen, like, yes, they can be highly trained and they can be extremely specific in the work that they do. Like, but at the end of the day, they're an individual and they have their own motivations, and they aren't going to necessarily be your silver bullet, to solve this particular problem or challenge that you might be having. So really communicating like it is my duty as obviously the caregiver and the keeper of my dogs to advocate for them, and I do that first and foremost like right away with like they can't sniff out everything all the time all at once under all conditions. So um and explaining that to the general public has a different spin on it, but I'm very open to discussing like, hey, if you've ever owned a dog or a cat, or even like you have, two-legged housemates in your house, like we all have our own personalities, right? And even over the course of the dog's working career, like a younger dog's gonna be different in their efficiencies than an older dog. And sometimes they're more efficient when they're older, sometimes they're more efficient when they're younger. Um, so there's some of that. There's also our interaction with the environment that we're working in. That is something that I am very aware of when I am out and about with my dogs, whether we're working or not. If we're just, hiking around the community. Um, our organization and a lot of other conservation dog organizations are very adamant about leaving as little trace behind as possible when we're out doing our work. And, obviously the dogs are walking on things just like humans are, but we are not intentionally training our dogs to interact with wildlife, whether it's the actual target that they're trained to find. We're not like picking up turtles in the dogs' mouths. We're not digging out the bumblebee nests, right? And even beyond that, outside of the targets that the dogs are trained to find, Betty has a little bit of more of an interest in rabbits and things, but I keep her on a leash to make sure she can't harm other wildlife, and she's usually very focused on her task when we're actually working. Um, but it's also, yeah, I'm like, I don't know if I should just stop myself because I'm like, I don't want to go down a big enough rabbit hole, no pun intended. Um, Does that kind of help? I don't know if you want me to skew off
Yeah,
in
no, keep
a different.
going.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, I also am very mindful of like the vocabulary I'm using. So on our website, for example, when we did a rebrand and a rename, we used to be Midwest Conservation Dogs. We shifted during the pandemic. We did like a whole like, what do we want to do next? Like what's our long-term goal here with the work that we're doing? And changing the name of our organization to Conservation Dogs Collective was a very intentional choice. So obviously conservation dogs, but the whole mindset around being a collective, and it's not just about like a collection, like we've gotten questions like, oh, are you just a collection of conservation dogs? I'm like, no, it's a much larger scope than that. So it's the collective of the work we're doing within the environment, um, the folks that we're talking to, whether it's just someone that loves our work, or someone that wants to come in and do the work with their own dogs, or partnering with universities and getting their own program up and running and so forth. And then also a lot of the verbiage in the working dog world within conservation, but also outside, they use words such as dog handler teams. And like that word handler never felt right to me because I'm like, I guess I'm handling because I'm like holding a leash in my hand. But to me, a handler almost seems like I am like handling my dog, right? And I'm not saying folks that associate themselves with that type of title or wording are like bad people, because that is far, far, far from the truth. But we intentionally chose finder keeper teams. So our dogs are finders. They're the ones finding the things. And then we are the keepers. We are the keepers of the dog. We are the keepers of the environment that we're working within. So to me, words matter a lot. Sometimes I use the worst words ever, but when I'm really thinking about like what is the impression I want to make and leave in the conservation dog world and those that interact with and cross my path, I have made some very conscious choices in how I choose to participate in this world.
I think that's really important. And I find myself falling into this trap as well with language where, for example, with like the term reactive dog, and I do use that term because that's what other people understand, even though I want to challenge that term because I understand that my dog Lucky it's not a reacting, he's responding to the world, right?
Mhm.
Like it's just and he is it's communication too. He's telling me I'm overwhelmed or I don't know how to process this. I need your help. I want that thing to stay away. Like it's communication. But when we term reactive, and it's not just the term reactive, it's also the connotations that we place around that. I find it to be very divisive in terms of actually understanding what's going on with the dog and how we best support them and where the onus actually is on who's meant to actually help in that situation. Like in many respects, it's I need to be more
more cognizant of I've put him in a situation that he can't handle, or the other person has come into our sphere and created a situation that he can't handle, right? So I agree with you. There's a real power to words, and even from the kind of like mystical perspective, I believe that words are like spell casting, that when we keep putting something out there, we're not only are we setting a kind of intention, but we're inviting stuff back to us. And so when we understand that and we intentionally shift our languaging, we can then create the kind of experience that we want to be creating. And we're also signaling to other people where we're at in that conversation,
Mhm.
right? And
Yeah.
that's how we change the conversation is through intentionally spell casting the words that we feel are important to do that. So I love that you do that because I think it's really important about the collaborative work that you do, as well as the fact as you've mentioned, there's an invitation for us to see things so differently and not just from this anthropocentric perspective that we typically take. And so, what happens when we shift the language in terms of relationship dynamics, but we also shift the way that we're understanding what's happening in this situation, where yes, it's about finding the turtles in the bumblebee nests, and it's so much more, right? It's so much more. I wondered if you could kind of reflect on your feelings around that as well, if that resonates with you.
It totally resonates with me. And like the whole reactivity, like I used to be the person that was like, I have a reactive dog, like Oscar, reactive, 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 her. And I think it was Suzanne Clothier who, it was either her or Kay Lawrence, one of the two, maybe both, was like, you have a German Shepherd. They're bred to react to the environment. And I was like, oh. And then furthermore, they were like, a non-reactive dog is a dead dog. Like, and that sounded really morbid, but I was like, oh, I see what you mean by that, right? They are responding to
Yeah.
the environment. Like if they aren't reacting, like there probably is something wrong with them, right? Medically, physically, what so forth. So that was like one of my big, like, oh my God, like big aha moments in my own life about how the use of words can really pigeonhole and like somewhat handicap your own
Hmm.
development, right? And your relationship with your dog. So yeah, 100%. With Conservation Dogs Collective, I have gotten countless comments and, whether it was in person or over email or social media, like around the joy and colorfulness of like our marketing and how we speak about our projects too. And like to me, that makes me incredibly happy because that removes a lot of barriers, in my opinion, for people to want to learn more about working dogs and conserve. I'll even just say conservation too. Like the gateway of like, oh my God, look at these happy dogs and this happy kind of tone of voice that this organization is using. I think I'm going to send them an email. I'm really curious about this. Or, when we're at like public events in person, I've got like life size or even larger than life size, cutouts of the dogs and lots of colorful infographics. And people come over like, what is this? Like, what is this coloring page? And then like on the coloring page, it has, some of the scientific terms around, what the dogs are doing and like what this particular species in need, is, why it's important, like when do they get listed as an endangered species and so forth. So having that ability for language to be mindfully used to reach the, I'll say the mass audiences, right? And I like do not pretend to be a scientist. I am definitely not a scientist. I can talk a little bit of the scientific talk and use some of that terminology, but I feel like that, like as me as an individual, can be very like off-putting. Like no, everybody who knows me, and this now, about me, Alexia, is like reading a research paper is like one of the most aversive things that I have to do in my career. I can do it, and I absolutely do that type of reading because I need to. And I want to, but I'm like, oh my God, I would rather like have somebody distill this down into more conversational language, right? So I feel that is incredibly important when we're talking about conservation work period, like full stop. Bumblebees. Like people are like, oh, I didn't know bumblebees were a native species to the United States. Like I didn't even know there were more than one species of bumblebee. But because you call them fuzzy pandas, now I'm gonna, fuzzy flying pandas. Now I'm gonna remember like, oh, the big fuzzy butts that are flying around my garden are actually really gentle, and they do this certain type of pollination that's critical for our local habitat and agricultural pollination. So I love that you brought that up. I love it.
Yeah, no, I love that you're mentioning that too specifically and about the research papers as like I like to refer to myself as a recovering academic, and kind of coming out of that. And like you, I mean, I read the research papers, I know how to read the research papers, and I also know how they are so often intentionally written in as a gatekeeping device to the kind of general public. And one of the things that, like you, I am such an advocate for making information available to people in a way that they can understand it and integrate it. Actually integrate it and make sense. Because if we are going to do anything about the environmental catastrophes that we experience, we need everybody to be on board with us and to understand why it's important and why we need to advocate for other species, even if we don't necessarily feel like there's a direct link to, like, well, how is this going to benefit me? It's like, well, you benefit one species, it benefits all, right? So I love that idea of the dogs become, because I say this too, they're like a gateway drug to like so
Oh
many
my God.
wonderful things, right?
Yeah.
They open the door, those cute little faces just open the door to
Yes.
everything.
Absolutely. And I, again, like countless times, like people will see us working out in the field or at a public presentation. It's the first time they have ever heard about a dog being used for conservation efforts. And they're like, I had no idea a dog could do that, and like with their cute faces, whether they're all black, all yellow, or mixed breed, floppy-eared, people that love dogs immediately are invested in learning more about how they're able to help with conservation, right? And like myself included in that, because in 2016, when I got the phone call about like, hey, can you help with our conservation dog program? I'm like, what the heck is a conservation dog? And I'm like, and I love dogs, so I'm like on the internet, like, like, what is it? Oh my gosh, look at all the stuff they can do, all the things that we don't even know they can do yet. And having that just obviously like passion about dogs really take me into the next part of my career is just incredible, first and foremost, but also my ability to share that story with others, right? I'm like, I was you know what I mean? I'm like, I was you not so long ago. And there are so many things we can learn from just being open to learning. I know that sounds lame, but like, well, it kind of does, but I'm like, also at the same time, like we lose our ability to just stay curious,
Right.
at a certain point in our life. And I'm like, dogs are a great way to just rechannel that natural playfulness and curiosity that we have for learning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
100%. 100%. Oh, I love this so much. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about if you have seen, because I'm sure people are going to be curious, like, oh, could my dog actually be trained to do this? Do you feel like there are particular, obviously, we know there are certain breeds that are predisposed to be really good at sniffing things out, but could any dog be trained to do this work? Is that a possibility?
Every dog probably has some kind of project they could work on, depending on their size and attitude and motivations to want to navigate certain environments. There are kind of two big divides in the type of conservation work. One is like actual field work, where you're out there in the wilderness, whether that's a prairie area, along a cliff edge or whatever, like all the things that are out in the natural world. And then there's also some more, I call them like laboratory setups, where it's more of a detection task, where the dog is being presented with a particular sample or a lineup of samples. And I think that particular exploration and way that dogs can be useful can hit much more of a wide audience of dogs, right? Because it's a less physical demanding ask for the dog. And I'm like really trying not to minimize like that type of work too, because a lot of the detection tasks, which could either be a single sample or a lineup, a lot of times that's going to be more of a discrimination task or a precision-based task, which takes a certain type of mentality in a dog to be able to perform those types of tasks. So, so that's my long answer-ish to your question. I think at minimum, every single dog is somewhat of a natural nosy conservation dog, you know? So like when you're out walking alongside your dog, even just taking an interest in like, oh, this time of year my dog is, you know, sniffing a daffodil, like you were saying with Lucky, and being aware of like what they are showing you. Because like my dogs, this time of year, it's spring, right? And the grass is starting to come up, the grasses and other types of vegetation are starting to come up, and my dogs can absolutely sniff out certain species of grass that they want to snack on and bypass other species of grasses that they don't think taste good, right? So like even just having that kind of like awareness to what your dog is drawn to in the natural environment, I think is a great way to become more invested in learning about your native species and you know what can happen from there. I don't know. Like certain dogs really love to sniff out bugs and insects, right? Or obviously scat is usually very popular with a lot of dogs. And
Mhm.
um, thinking about what's possible, and like I'll say too, like sometimes it's not gonna be the best choice for you to make it into a career because like sometimes the joy gets lost then, right? So my husband's like a very avid at-home chef, and I was always like, why don't you just go into a professional career in a kitchen? He's like, because I would lose all the happiness and joy out of it. And when like I always like appreciate him saying that because he enjoys the process and kind of
Mhm.
putzing around on his own timeline, right? And like I think that's something to really honor too with your dog. Like they they might just enjoy the mosey sniffing, right? When it's under more of a time pressure potentially, or if you're sniffing out like endangered species in particular, or just really cryptic species, it can be extremely challenging, I would say more for the human than
Mhm.
necessarily for the dog. So like the reinforcement ratio strain that is a reality of my job. You know, I have done a ton of mental coaching and resilience training to help guide myself through that, which also then allows me to guide my dogs through that lower find rate. So invasive species you would think can be even more enjoyable in a way, but also at the same time, you're like, oh my God, my dog's finding all of these invasive species everywhere. And you're like, you know, sometimes it can be overwhelming in a sense, like a scent work sense, but also the mental sense. You're like, we're never going to get rid of the invasive
Right.
species. You know what I mean? So part of it, that's some of the conversations I have with folks who contact me, like, hey, I want to do this work, or, you know, I have a dog that's already doing the work, but I'm relocating, or I'm just, you know, hoping to retire and then get into this work. I have these conversations very openly and honestly with them. And I'm like, you absolutely can do some kind of conservation with your dog, right? Whether or not it's in a more professional sense, like here are some considerations that you should think about before navigating into that world.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it reminds me of some of the things that we talk about in the kind of canine nutrition and well-being space, which is compassion fatigue.
Mhm.
A similar kind of thing of like those are the parts of the job that don't get spoken about that are
Mhm.
a real aspect of doing this work, and you need to kind of prepare yourself for that. And also when I was doing climate change work, it can be really, really depressing. It can be really hard when and feel as though what have we done and are we ever going to get out of this? And you know, I certainly dipped into points of just feeling like complete nihilism, like what's the point of all of, you know, because it can feel so unbelievably overwhelming. But I do have to say, and I imagine you probably feel this too, that when there would be I always found that there was like this perfect synergistic balance that when I went through a period of like what's the point, and also doing it from through the lens of art made it feel even more in a sense worthless, like what is even the point of this, like how am I making any kind of a difference? And then you have that one conversation with somebody
Mhm.
through your work, and it's you realize like it sparked something, or they've had a mindset shift, or they feel hopeful about something, and it just makes everything worthwhile at that point. But you do need to be aware that that's part of the process of working in these kinds of really challenging spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also a fine artist by schooling.
Oh,
So,
are
like, fun fact, yes, I went to arts college. So, um,
you?
so I definitely get the whole like seeing nature like through an artistic lens, and even like interacting with myself after a field work day, or like as I'm grooming the dogs, like I make little piles of dogs. So, but yeah, like I think taking care of yourself, like that is one thing I've learned just as I have grown into my adulthood more, has become a priority. Like if I don't take care of myself, I can't take care of my dogs, and I can't take care of the world around me, beyond that as well. And having this is like such a larger discussion, right? But like, what systems do you have in place to support
Yeah.
yourself, right? And like your, whatever, your friends, your family, your dogs. I mean, like a lot of times folks that are younger, right? And I mean this very sincerely, because I'm old enough but young enough to remember like my early 20s and like how much of a workhorse I was back then. I'm like, I can do all the things all the time, every day. And nobody around me, and my parents obviously were saying like, you need to make, like, oh, you're kind of burning the candle at both ends, Laura. But I didn't have a system in place, and like culturally, we don't really talk about that, like as young children, even like, hey, you need to,
Mhm.
take care of your mental health, and like it's okay to step away every once in a while. And I think in conservation, at least in the United States, I'm sure it's like that elsewhere in the world, like people that get into conservation are extremely passionate people, and dog people also very passionate. So
Mhm.
when we have this combined world of conservation detection dog teams getting out there, like I have talked to so many colleagues about, I have very clear boundaries. Like when I am not going to be working, like I am not going to be working. And I'm like, I will not do 3 or 4 days in a row of work with my dogs out in the field. I'm like, because like our physical health, our mental health completely slides at a certain point. And even if we have the physical energy to do it, I'm like, guess like you have to start taking care of yourself to do the work. And I think it's more fulfilling work at that point too. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm. Oh,
there's a lot
totally.
of, yeah, and there's like there's a lot of larger systems in place that take advantage of people that are like, I will do, 70 hours of work a week. And I'll have 8 dogs across one person because I would have to, fulfill these somewhat ridiculous criterias and spreadsheets and protocols and stuff. So I think people need to talk about that more. We only get one time here on this planet. Like,
Yeah, no, well, it's so important, and it's I love that you're bringing this up because this is so in line with conversations that I've been having lately around how we see ourselves as part of an ecosystem. And I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Dr. Zach Bush. Have you heard?
doesn't sound familiar, but doesn't mean I haven't heard about it.
He's a medical doctor who kind of has gone outside of the traditional role of Western medicine and started to really look at and talk about living in an ecosystem and how part of, I'm totally terribly kind of paraphrasing, but to kind of give a bit of a context, like how, particularly in the West, where we have started to see ourselves as separate from nature, and we have created this value system that is so contrary to actually our biology, right? So to your point of like we should be working 70 hours a week when in reality we were never designed to do that. And so he talks about a lot of like the dis-ease of our kind of current times coming from those rubs from that disconnection from nature and from our true selves and not really understanding our biology even from a spiritual level. Like what are we here for? And I think that was part of what was driving a lot of my work when I was doing the art and climate change stuff, where a lot of the conversations I was having with people is like, yeah, we definitely need to approach conservation and climate change and mitigation and those sort of big issues from a scientific and technological lens. Sure. And until we start asking those bigger questions about the value systems, about how we see ourselves in relation to nature, we're going to keep repeating the same behaviors that have led to this very situation. And so it becomes a band-aid upon a band-aid upon a band-aid. And it's like, how many band-aids can we actually put on this until we actually look at the core wound that's
Mhm.
going on? And that wound is not specifically the bumblebees or the turtles. That's a symptom of the deeper wound that we're not addressing. you know, like of how have we created this for all of these species and for ourselves. And that's where I think the dogs are another gateway for us because they open us up. To your point, I think dog people are very passionate and they're also very empathetic.
Mhm.
And when we have that kind of a relationship with another species, when we're able to see that we can share a love and a bond, and you can care as much for another species, or perhaps more than you even, some people love their dogs more than they love people, right? Like there's
Mhm.
that level of like love and connection. That to me is like a prime opportunity to actually open up and ask those bigger questions. It becomes a way to talk about those deeper things that have contributed to what we're looking at on this kind of surface level that we see as the problem, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I will like circle that back to nose work, doing nose work with your dog. I have hundreds of students over the past 14 years that have come in just like, I just want to do something with my dog. You know, they're like, oh, my vet told me I should do nose work because my dog's overactive or reactive or aggressive or whatever. And like after usually like around a 4 to 6 month mark of doing nose work, people start to open up and talk about things that they're noticing their dog do at home or outside, you know, and like having a an awareness and appreciation for their dog doing doggy things, you know? And I think that even last night or yesterday, technically in the afternoon, I had a class that has been with me for about a year and a half. I did an exercise with them that was, we're gonna sit around a table together for the first half hour, and we're gonna go around and talk about what we admire about every single one of your dogs. And like everybody got to talk about their own dog. Everybody talked about each other's dogs. And then I actually flipped these sheets over. I'm like, and now we're gonna do it about yourself. And we're gonna talk about you and yourself, right? So like having the ability to really appreciate one another and be vulnerable and open, like with that kind of conversation that all stemmed with like you got to do this activity of nose work with your dog, right? And like some of the things people were sharing and saying, I was like, this is like making my heart so happy. And it turned into a bigger conversation too about like, you know what? Like I challenged a couple of my classes last week, like just throw a training hide out in your backyard. And they're like, but that's where my dog goes to the bathroom, or like that's where the coyotes come through at night. Or I was like, just throw it out there and let your dog go sniff out something that you didn't walk out and place for them. And I was like, if you send me a video, you know, I kind of incentivized it for them. I was like, if you send me a video of your dog sniffing this out, like you'll get a little prize, you know, the next time I see you. And the amount of people that did this homework assignment, quote unquote homework assignment, that did it immediately when they got home or within 24 hours and like sent me this long text of like, oh my God, I can't believe my dog, you know, I have like a bog marsh and my dog like jumped right in and it was rainy and slushy and I just got to stand there with my camera and just watch my dog be like the happiest dog ever. Like that type of feedback to me is like the most important thing ever. And I got them out in their own and immediate environment, right? So as the weather continues to change into summer and fall, I want to continue offering that invitation to people like get your dog outside, but two, you know, like what do you notice in your backyard? What was different from your exploration in March to your exploration in June in the same environment? Like what did you notice? What did you hear? What did you see? Did you smell anything different while you were watching your dog, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I love it because it's a really simple, easy way to start that reconnection process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's
100%.
like when I am talking with folks about Conservation Dogs Collective in particular, and they're like, what can I do? You know, when they learn about bumblebees or turtles or other species and preservation, like, I don't own acres and acres of land to plant a prairie. I'm like, you can do some massively positive things in your own yard in the city, you know, like, or even a planter. The Homegrown National Park, Douglas Tallamy's resource and website is incredible for that. It's like you can make a difference in a, you know, 1 foot by 1 foot part of your house or your window ledge or whatever you can do. you know? So,
I love that. That's really tangible. And actually, there are things that you can do. So I'm thinking from the kind of nutrition and well-being perspective for the dog as well. Like, so when you were mentioning like the dogs jumping in like the boggy marsh and all that, I'm thinking, yes, microbiome support. Like this is so good for their health, right? Like
yeah.
there's another boost for them by doing those kinds of activities. But also, if you're doing a planter, thinking about like uh, pollinating. Or pollinating, attracting plants, but also fragrant plants that will repel pests, for example,
Mhm.
like keeping mosquitoes away from your doors and all that kind of stuff. That's another level of parasite prevention for your dog that
Mhm.
is supporting the environment. And I mean, it's an easy way to make those links, those connections between different aspects of this ecosystem
Yeah,
and serve different
absolutely.
roles.
And
I
little
love,
thing, herb garden, excuse me, an herb garden
yeah,
for your dog, like edible
right.
herbs for your dogs, right? Like,
Yeah,
yeah, we do all
yeah.
of those things.
Totally. And like you were saying, like watching them self-select is so interesting because that also,
Mhm.
again, from the kind of nutrition standpoint, that gives me insights into what's going on in their gut.
Mhm.
What do they need? What support are they actually finding for themselves? They're telling you, they're seeking out these medicines.
Mhm.
And that to me also points to it's an invitation to kind of reconnect with our own wisdom within our own bodies. So
Yeah,
there's it's that mirroring that starts to go on.
absolutely. I've been known to also like eat some of the things, like the dog self-select,
Yeah.
not like on the street or on the sidewalk or anything, right? But like in our backyard, or if I am out in nature and I can identify the plants and things, I was like, what is it about this particular taste? And I'm like, oh, surprisingly like sweet but bitter at the same time, like or
And
smelling. I mean, I love to rub again if I can, if it's not like a,
yeah,
protected plant or whatever. I love to get a little bit of the plant or vegetation on my hands and actually like smell like what is the aroma behind this particular environmental species that, my dogs are super interested in. Like, why are they smelling this blade of grass? Like inspecting it so thoroughly.
exactly. And a lot of herbalists would say that you engaging in that with rubbing it on is a form of medicine. And also that there is a link between the plants that are coming up seasonally and what we typically need to support our health. So, for example, from a traditional Chinese medicine lens, spring is seen as being connected to the liver gallbladder system, and which is detox. And it is the detox season. We talk about spring cleaning, for example. It's kind of like dusted everything off. But what's coming up in the spring? Things like dandelions are starting. And we know that they're bitter tonics, right? They help to detox the physical body. So you'll start to see dogs as well starting to eat the dandelions because they naturally know now's the time to boost that system. I need a little bit of support after the winter,
Yeah.
which is, I mean, to me, that's
It's so
magic.
cool. It is,
It's
yeah.
so cool.
Yeah.
It's so cool. Laura, I could talk to you for hours. Like this is just I love it. This is just so interesting. And I love having these deeper conversations around our relationships with dogs. Is there anything that you would like to talk about that I haven't asked you? Because I know we've kind of touched on some of the conservation stuff specifically with the projects you're doing, but is there anything you want to go into more detail of or make listeners aware of?
Yeah, I would love if people want to get nosy, and we head over to our website, conservationdogscollective.org, and learn more about obviously the dogs. They have their own page, but the programs that we work on, and then we have a pretty nice resource library as well for some of the enrichment activities you can do with your dogs if you're looking to get more involved. And I just want to really emphasize like every dog deserves to be a nosework dog, so whether you have the ability to hook up with an instructor and get into a formal class or not, there's online classes nowadays, like all over. But really, I think I think if your dog had a say in it, besides having access to shelter, a cushy spot, water, food, they also really want to sniff. So, let them sniff as much as you can allow them to, um, and stay curious for sure. We have some really exciting turtle work coming up, so folks can just follow us along on social media. And Bumblebee Nest work season will come up in July and August. So I do my best to share as much as I can. It's a one-person show at the moment, but Ernie and Betty White also have their own Patreon family. So if anybody wants to join their family, they like to share some of the daily antics and training videos that we're doing for not just nose work, but also husbandry. And like I do meal prep every week for Ernie, and I get to show folks what he's eating, and they get to taste test all that stuff. So I like to have folks around, so if you have any questions, any listeners have questions, you're welcome to reach out anytime, over email, through the website. Social's a little harder for me because I limit as part of my mental stamina. I limit my time on social media. So if you reach out there, you might not hear back from me ever. Although I do share our news there. I'm not sitting there in the inbox, but yeah, I really appreciate talking with you too, Alexia. This was great.
This is really fun. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. And I know we've kind of talked about this like throughout, but I want to ask you one last question to give you a chance to reflect on it maybe a little bit differently. And it's a question that I ask all of my guests, and that is, what do you feel like your dogs have taught you personally about what it means to be human?
Oh my gosh. So I think my immediate answer to that is like that I am also an animal. I am also a wild animal. Um, that's for sure, I think. And besides that, I feel like one of the greatest lessons every single dog I've had has taught me is to not take shit so seriously, to really take time to play every day, and whatever that play manifests as, whether it's physical play or emotional play. Well, it's intertwined, obviously, but yeah, not take stuff so seriously.
That's a really, really good piece of advice and a great way to end this conversation. Thank you so, so much, Laura. I'm so grateful for you coming on and just sharing your time and your energy and your wisdom today.
Thank you. It was great. I appreciate you so much.
I appreciate you too.
Thank you so much for joining me for my conversation with Laura Holder of Conservation Dogs Collective. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I would love to know what your biggest takeaways are. Feel free to DM me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama and let me know. To get in touch with Laura and to learn more about what the conservation dogs are up to, check out their website, conservationdogscollective.org. And don't forget, if you're curious about how to evaluate your own dog's parasite risk and prevent parasites naturally without harsh chemicals, you'll love our Fetch Parasites in Our Dogs, a Paradigm Shift ebook. Grab your copy at mysticdogmama.com/shop and feel empowered to protect your pup naturally. Again, I've left all these links in the show notes. All right, until next time.